Hey, what up YouTube, and welcome back to a video with Rams fan YT. In today's video, I will be comparing your Premier League and Championship and Premier League clubs' old stadium, whatever they had before they moved into their current ground, and their modern one, and seeing. Well, I'll let you decide, but I may give my opinion as well about which one is potentially better. So I'll lay out a load of facts for the old and a load of facts for the new. Actually, we'll start with the new ones first. Arsenal currently play the Emirates. They have a capacity of 60,704 people. We'll compare that to Highbury, their old stadium, that had 73,000. So they've downscaled, presumably because of the Taylor report, meant that it was consequently downscaling Highbury. Anyhow, the record attendance at the Emirates was 60,383 of Arsenal v Wolverhampton Wanderers in the 2nd of November 2019. Whereas the record at Highbury was 73,295 of Arsenal v Sunderland on the 9th of March 1935. And then this one's the most subjective one. The category I've got is the best game played at that stadium. For me, it's got to be the Arsenal 2-1 win over Barcelona on my birthday in 2011, the 16th of February. An absolute amazing game. Was, I think, quarterfinals of the Champions League. But yeah, well, the best game at Highbury was Arsenal's 3-0 win over Anderlecht in the Interfairs Cup final on the 28th of April 1970. Bit of silverware there as well at the end of it. It's always better to win the silverware on home ground, although I think they were two-legged affairs. And then the opening game was the Emirates was Arsenal v Ajax, which was actually Dennis Bergkamp's testimonial on the 23rd of July 2006. One of the greatest opening games of a stadium ever, arguably, if it's a testimonial. Whereas the opening game at Highbury was an Arsenal 2-1 win over Leicester City, back when they were in the second division on the 6th of September 1913. For me, it's got to be Highbury. I mean, the memories associated with that, and also just the pure sort of essence of a historical club, a ground which they don't make anymore like that. And nostalgia won't always triumph, but I think Highbury's, the way it's regarded, definitely needs to triumph for this one. Aston Villa, well, their first ground was Villa Park. Many people don't know that there was a ground before Villa Park called Wellington Road, so that's what we're going to be comparing each other. The capacity of Villa Park is 42,657, whereas we don't know the capacity of Wellington Road. The record attendance at Aston Villa's Villa Park was 76,588 in a game of Aston Villa versus Derby County on the 2nd of March 1946. Way, come on, you Rams. Yeah, Derby, I've made this list a few times, actually, about records of attendances. But Wellington Road, it was only 26,849 of Villa versus Preston North End in an FA Cup 5th round on the 7th of January 1888. So we are going far back in time for this. Now, for the best game at Villa Park, it's got to be Aston Villa thrashing Liverpool 5-1 back on the 16th of December in 1976. What a crack of a game. Both teams were like relatively high-end teams at the time. They were really pushing up the leagues as well. Whereas the best game at Wellington Road doesn't even involve Aston Villa because it's got to be England beating Ireland 6-1 in the British Home Championship on the 25th of February 1893. For those that don't know what the British Home Championship was, it was sort of like UK-wide based competition. So you had Ireland v England, v Scotland v Wales, and then later on Northern Ireland when the Republic went independent. It was basically the first form of like international competition. The opening game at Villa Park was Aston Villa versus Blackburn Rovers in a friendly on the 17th of April 1897. So Villa Park is still really old, where we don't really know the one for Wellington Road. So I've got to say, Villa Park every day of the week. It's such a beautiful stadium as well. it radiates forbidden energy, really. It does. The sort of terrace styling, definitely. Yeah. Bournemouth, well, they play now at Dean Court, but they originally played at Kings Park. I'm telling you from the outset, we don't know any of the stats about Kings Park that I've just rattled off. But we know that the capacity of Dean Court was 11,307. The record attendance is 28,799 when Bournemouth played Manchester United on the 2nd of March 1957. So that's going a while back, to be fair. And the best game was definitely Bournemouth beating Manchester United 2-0 on the 7th of January 1984 when they were in the third round of the FA Cup. And by the way, they were like a fourth division side during this time. So it was a real giant killing sort of event. Nowadays, you wouldn't bat an eyelid at Bournemouth beating Manchester United 2-0, as they did just for last weekend, didn't they? Opening game was unknown, but it was on the 31st of December 1910 is all we do know. So, and we don't know anything about Kings Park, so Dean Court has got to win, really. Brentford, they recently moved into the G-Tech Community Stadium, or the Brentford Community Stadium, whatever you want to call it, and that capacity of 17,250. And the beloved home Griffin Park for many years has a capacity of 12,300. The record attendance at the G-Tech is 17,201 of Brentford versus Arsenal on the 25th of November 2023. Yeah, they literally broke it just a few weeks back because it's such a new stadium. Whereas their Griffin Park attendance was 38,678 against Brentford v Leicester City in the FA Cup 6th round. Yeah, back when it had a 6th round, that is, on the 24th of February 1949. Way back then. Brentford had really had their best seasons, I think, in the 1940s and 30s until recently. And the best game, though, at the G-Tech was Germany women 2, Austria women 0, and that was the Euros 2022 quarterfinals. I mean, inevitably, a Brentford game will come up at some point in the near future, I imagine, of a Premier League game of some sort. But that was on the 21st of July 2022, and international games do always be quite good. Brentford beating 6-0 over Derby County at Griffin Park, though, surely their biggest, a great result at Griffin Park, and that was on the 2nd of May 1936. So we're talking a long time ago there. The opening game of G-Tech was Oxford United drawing 2-2 against Brentford on the 1st September 2020, which was a pre-season friendly and nothing much game. Whereas it was another draw, but Brentford drawing 1 apiece with Plymouth Argyle on the 1st September 1904 when they played in the Western League, is when Griffin Park opened. And for me, it's got to be Griffin Park. I mean, they're really equal. The new stadium is quite nice. It does have a modern stadium feel to it, but Griffin Park is such an icon of the years, spanning generations on the terraces. Brighton and Hove Albion, the Amex or American Express Stadium, and we'll be comparing it to the Withdean Stadium. That might be a bit controversial because, and by the way, I'm not including ground shares with clubs as like an interim measure or something, because that's ridiculous. But the Withdean is officially their last stadium, but they were only there for a few years at that. But yes, the Amex has a capacity of 31,876, comparing to Withdean's measly small 8,850, which I think is going to be the smallest on this list. The record attendance at the Amex is 31,872, 4 off the capacity, when actually Brighton versus Luton on the 12th of August 2023. That's an interesting game, considering it's this season, and I wouldn't have thought that would have been a big game at all. I know it's like the opening game of the season, but still, a bit of an interesting one. Whereas at the Withdean, it was 8,691 with Brighton Hove Albion versus Leeds United on the 20th of October 2007. Both teams were a bit in the mud at that time as well. So Definitely has some interesting things riding on it. The best game at the Amex is England women 2-1 over the Spanish women in the 2022 quarterfinals on the 20th of July 2022. Partly because these are two massive women's teams up against each other. Like, don't get us wrong, like the men's teams are also big, but England women versus Spain women, huge game. And also the fact that England went through to the finals that campaign as well. Whereas with Dean, it was Brighton Hove Albion 2, Manchester City 2, with Brighton winning 5-3 on penalties. That was on the 24th of September 2008 in the EFL Cup second round. So, yeah, just really before the takeover by the City group of Manchester City. And so it really sparked something for both teams. But Brighton was still really quite low. They weren't even in the Premier League at the time. I think they were League One even. The opening game of Brighton Hove Albion's Amex was a 2-3 loss to, or 3-2 loss to Tottenham Hotspur on the 16th of July 2011 in a pre-season friendly. Whereas the opening game with Dean was Brighton Hove Albion's 6-0 triumphs of Mansfield Town. Bit of an unfortunate one for Mansfield there. That was on the 7th of August 1999. Without a shadow of a doubt, it definitely goes to the Amex. I mean, the With Dean was ranked numerous times for worst stadium in English football. It's woeful, and it is still played in by AFC Vardinians. It is still a operational non-league ground this time. I think in Tier 9 and was Southern Combination, probably. It may be Tier 10 now. I'm not too sure about that. But yeah, on to Burnley. They have had a previous ground, a Cowder Vale, but nothing is known about Cowder Vale. Literally nothing. Very hard to research it online. And Turf Moor is the stats I will be mainly reading off, with a capacity of 21,944 and the record attendance of 54,775 of a game versus Burnley versus Huddersfield Town. Both lovely regions, like lovely countryside nearby, and that was on the 23rd of February 1924 when Huddersfield's peak still hadn't yet come, and neither had Burnley's really, but they were both sort of teams which were up there. The best game though has got to be Burnley beating Napoli 3-0 at Turf Moor on the 18th of January 1967 in the Intercities Fairs Cup. Even though Burnley is not a city, it is definitely a town, but it was definitely an occasion to be there, seeing a European night. And the opening game was Burnley 6, Rawtenstall 3. Rawtenstall don't even exist anymore, and that was on the 17th of February 1883. But yeah, obviously it goes to Turf Moor because we know nothing about Cowder Vale other than it was a stadium that Burnley played at in their very formative years. Chelsea have only ever played at Stamford Bridge, but I'll tell you, in case you're interested about some of the stats, their capacity is 40,343, but they had a record attendance at Stamford Bridge of well over double that, of 82,905, of a London derby of Chelsea versus Arsenal on the 12th of October 1935. That's quite a while back as well, and so both clubs have gone really much higher in strength to strength since then. But the best game has got to be Chelsea beating Barcelona 4-2 on the 8th of March 2005. Such an iconic moment in Chelsea's history. Just when they were starting to become a real dominant force on the European stage, but Barcelona was still a massive club, and they were just about to approach their peak of tiki-taka football under Guardiola. Two juggernauts coming at each other, and Chelsea beating them 4-2. And the opening game was actually Chelsea beating Liverpool 4-0. Neither teams were massive at the time, but this was because this was the 4th of September 1905 in a friendly, just when Chelsea were recently formed. And Liverpool, although admittedly had been in the Football League, and I think they were in the first division at the time, still weren't the huge club as they are now. Crystal Palace, they now play at Selhurst Park, but they did play at the Nest. Now, the Nest, not much is known about and often gets confused with the Norwich City one, which we'll come to later. But the capacity of Selhurst Park is 25,486. We only have the minimum of a Nest, as we know it had at least 1,500, but inevitably much more than that. The record attendance at Selhurst Park is 51,482 of Crystal Palace versus Burnley on the 11th of May 1979. Don't really know why that was such a big game. I know Crystal Palace and Burnley were both struggling during the 1970s, so it's been an interesting one. But the best game was England 1, Wales 3. I never said it had to be the home side, because on the 1st of March 1926, the British Championship again, and this is like Wales's best result against England for years. I mean, there's been a couple of odd shocks, and this being one of them, but really, it was something which came as quite unexpected, really. We don't know either record attendance or the best game at the Nest, because not much is recorded about them. But we know the opening games of both, and the opening game at Crystal Palace was a 1-0 loss against Sheffield Wednesday on the 30th of August 1924. Admittedly, Sheffield Wednesday were the better team then, whereas the Nest opened with a Crystal Palace 4-1 win over Millwall on the 31st of August 1918. However, that is not the official opening, because we know that Croydon Common were the previous tenants, but we have no record of what games they actually played at this stadium. Obviously, Selhurst Park, much better stadium. Now, Everton and Liverpool, we're technically going to group together, because Everton's first stadium was Anfield, and Liverpool have only ever played at Anfield. So we're going to actually pit Goodison Park versus Anfield against each other. This is going to be tasty and going to get some hate in the comments, inevitably so. The capacity of Goodison is 39,414, which is fairly minor in comparison to the 54,074 of Anfield. We do realise that Everton, in a few years' time, I can't remember when they said they're going to 2026 or something like that, when their new the Waterloo Dock or something like that. It's a great new stadium by the looks of it. Well, looking forward to seeing that in action. It looks like one of the better and modern designs of stadiums. Record attendance, though, is actually at Goodison Park with 78,299, where Everton were playing against Liverpool in the Merseyside derby on the 18th of September 1948. Must have been an incredibly tasty game on that. Whereas Anfield's own record attendance is only 61,905, and it won't be beaten because the capacity's locked now. But Liverpool versus Wolves, actually, on the 2nd of February 1952. Wolves obviously were having a very great time in the 1950s. Stanley Matthews, obviously, I think was at the club at the time, and some of the other great names. Is it Jimmy Greaves as well? I could have got that completely wrong, but some of the great big names of both teams during the 1950s. But the best game for me at Goodison was Everton beating Bayern Munich 3-1 on the 24th of April 1985. Everton's European heydays, the 1980s, was definitely Everton's peak. Whereas I got Liverpool beating Real Madrid 4-0 on the 10th of March 2009, mainly because Liverpool had sort of been off the boil for a few years, and so it came as a bit more of a shock, where Real Madrid were really still at their heights in terms of it was really Barcelona in their prime at that time, but Real Madrid was still a huge club and still pushing Barcelona quite a lot during that period. The opening game at Goodison Park was Everton beating Bolton Wanderers 4-2 on the 2nd of September 1892 in a friendly. Obviously, they left Anfield over a rent dispute, hence why Liverpool was formed. And so Anfield's first game was also Everton beating a team called Earlstown 5-0 on the 28th of September 1884. I'm not going to be drawn on this debate. I currently think Anfield is better, but I think historically there is definitely a case for Everton. Goodison Park being a very good stadium as well, and often enshrouded with memories, and so we'll obviously miss Goodison when it goes. but I'm going to go this one as a draw because I don't want to hate in the comments. Fulham currently play at Craven Cottage, and they did play at a stadium called Parsons Green. Nothing is known about Parsons Green, though, so it's going to go to Craven Cottage. But just for some stats, the capacity of Craven Cottage is 22,384, but the record attendance is well over that double. That mark is 49,335. Fulham v Millwall in a very classic London derby on the 8th of October 1938. What a good game that would have been to attend. But I say the best game is actually Lyon women beating Turbine Potsdam 2-0 on the 26th of May 2011 in the Women's Champions League final. Yes, the Champions League final was hosted at Craven Cottage. Not many people know that. But the opening game was Fulham versus a team called Minerva on the 10th of October 1896 in the Middlesex Senior Cup. That competition just isn't really taken seriously anymore, but it would be nice to see people take the county cups a bit more seriously. Luton Town, currently play at Kenilworth Road, the iconic terraced housing to walk into the stadium. You can see it from your back garden, probably, if you're from Luton. Whereas Dunstable Road was the old one. The capacity of Kenilworth is 11,500, which is only marginally more than the rough estimate of 10,000 at Dunstable Road. But the record attendance at Kenilworth is huge. 30,063. 30,069. That is like way, way, way more. And that was actually Luton Town versus Blackpool on the 4th of March 1959 in the FA Cup 6th round replay. Now, Blackpool may not sound like a big draw nowadays. This was in the 6th round and a replay, so yeah, already quite far into a competition. And Blackpool at this time, let's not forget, were very much up there in terms of the 50s was such a good decade for Blackpool as a club. I think they won the first division at some point, potentially. I may be wrong about that, but they're definitely up there. Whereas the record at Dunstable Road was they didn't even reach their capacity. They got half capacity of 5,000 with a Luton versus Grimsby Town on the 27th of December 1897, which I think everybody can consider as a bit of a dead rubber game, even if it was played now. Maybe not as much for Grimsby, but it would still be a bit dead. But the best game at Kenilworth Road, I think, is England women 1-0 over Sweden, but Sweden winning 4-3 on penalties overall, because it's a two-legged affair. Was this women's affair on the 27th of May 1984 in the Women's Euros final? I don't think anyone really particularly remembers that happened, but I'm sure if you're interested in England's women, you may do. But the best game at Dunstable Road's got to be Luton Town 9, Lincoln City 3. A 12-goal cracker. I mean, it was almost a Christmas cracker as well, because it was the 18th of December, 1897. What a belter. I mean, you would have loved to be there. I don't think anyone can deny that. And that actually came only the week before the record attendance. So Luton were clearly doing stuff at that time. The opening game at Kenilworth Road was Luton Town drawing a 0-0 draw with Plymouth Argyle on the 4th of September 1905. Bit of a boring game. The opening at Dunstable Road was actually a Luton Town 3-0 win over Loughborough on the 3rd of April 1897 in the United League. I have no idea what the United League even was. Without a doubt, it goes to Kenilworth Road. I mean, they're going to move in a few years' time, but it is etched in history. Manchester City. We're going to be comparing the Etihad and Main Road. Ensuring conflict about, the traditional grounds are so much better, or no, modern grounds are better, because this is one of the most divisive ones out there. The capacity of the Etihad is 53,400, whereas Main Road's capacity when it closed was 35,150. Now, the record attendance at the Etihad it was 53,243 with Man City versus Leicester City on the 6th of February 2016. Obviously, Leicester went on to win the title that season, and Man City were trying to catch up on them. So it was definitely a very tasty game. Whereas Main Road's max attendance is 84,569 with Manchester City versus Stoke City on the 3rd of March 1934 in an FA Cup 6th round. And let's not forget, both teams were all right in that sort of campaign. But they weren't stunning. So I'm not entirely sure why they got that much attendance. But the best game at Etihad is the Aguero moment with Manchester City beating QPR 3-2 on the final day of the season, on the 13th of May 2012, to seal the title in extra time. What a game. I mean, never to be forgotten by people of my generation and people who are older. I mean, I think I'm probably the last generation to really remember that firsthand, but crikey, I don't think you could be much younger than I am, because that's the first Premier League I actually remember ever. So Manchester City beating Tottenham 4-1 at Main Road was quite a big one on the 9th of December 1967. The opening game, Manchester City beating Barcelona 2-1 at Etihad on the 10th of August 2003 in a friendly. Whereas the opening game at Main Road with Manchester City beating Sheffield United 2-1 on the 25th of August 1923. I'm sorry, I am going to have to go with the Etihad. I'm sorry, I think on an actual match day, it does go to Main Road. But I think in terms of some of the games we've seen at the Etihad now and the caliber of opposition, it has got to go to them because that stadium has seen some history. On to the cross-city rivals of Manchester United, and we'll be comparing Old Trafford versus their previous ground called Bank Street. Now, they did have many more before that, and that may be worth a video if somebody wants to. If you want to see the history of Manchester United's grounds, feel free to comment that, and I will make it. But if not, there may not be the demand for it. Now, the capacity of Old Trafford is 74,310. One of, if not the biggest, it is like one of the biggest, isn't it, in the entirety of England? They call it the Theatre of Dreams, don't they? Whereas Bank Street had a roundabout, this is an estimate, we don't know precisely, 50,000 seats or capacity. Record attendance at Old Trafford is 76,962. It wasn't even set by Manchester United, actually, because this was probably in an FA Cup tie. I didn't write that down, but it was Wolverhampton Wanderers versus Grimsby Town on the 25th of March 1939. That's ironically, really, to have an attendance of a record which isn't an international match and isn't a home team involved match. I think it's only Old Trafford, which surely gets that. And Bank Street, we don't actually know what record attendance was. The best game at Old Trafford was, ironically, a 0-0 draw between Juventus and AC Milan, with AC Milan winning on penalties 3-2. So on the 28th of May 2003 in the Champions League final. Not a classic, it's a 0-0 draw, but it was certainly an atmosphere. I think two Italian giants competing for the ultimate, probably the best piece of silverware that a club would ever want in that state, in Old Trafford. Whereas Bank Street, Manchester United beating Blackburn Rovers 6-1 on the 20th of February 1909 in the FA Cup third round. Not least because Blackburn Rovers were one heck of a team during that time as well. It was around about 10 years, wasn't it, from their first division title win, and they may have got another one at some point during that time. Whereas the opening game we'll go with the opening game of Old Trafford, was actually a bit of a rivalry nowadays, but I don't think it was seen much as a rivalry then, with Liverpool beating Manchester United 4-3 on the 19th of February 1910. But certainly an interesting one. Whereas the opening game at Bank Street was Manchester United beating Burnley 3-2 on the 1st of September 1893. I am going to have to say it is Old Trafford is definitely the better stadium, but not really. Manchester United's memories couldn't really cusp onto the Old Trafford stage, which I think does just prove how great Old Trafford is. Newcastle United have only ever played at St James's Park, but I will rattle through some of their stats. Capacity is 52,305 at the moment. There's talks of either moving to a new stadium or increasing the current capacity. I'll be very much having conversations about that with some of the people up here. The record attendance at St James's Park is 68,386, which was a game of the Geordies versus the Londoners of Newcastle United versus Chelsea on the 3rd of September 1930. The best game has got to have come in the last few weeks. The atmosphere around Newcastle was electric. I just remember walking through the town and just feeling the buzz around the place. It was Newcastle United ran out winners of 4-1 against Paris Saint-Germain on the 4th of October 2023. I mean, sure, people could probably argue a whole list of other Newcastle games, but on the European nights in the Champions League, after so long of not being in European competition as well. And the opening game was Newcastle Rangers playing their first team versus their reserves back in the 18th of October 1880. Nobody really knows much about Newcastle Rangers. It's very hard to find stuff out about them online. But Newcastle United, or even Newcastle West End, who originally were the tenants of the club, weren't actually the holders of the first game. Nottingham Forest, it's quite interesting to see the development of it, because they currently play at the City Ground, but when they were a town, they played at the Town Ground, which was actually a separate stadium. The capacity of the City Ground is 30,404, less than Derby's. I imagine being that embarrassing. Whereas Town Ground's capacity was 15,000. What a meager capacity. The record attendance at the City Ground is 49,946 in a game of Forest versus Man United back on the 28th of October 1967. Obviously, in 1967, Manchester United was still a force to deal with. Even after they'd lost after the Munich air disaster, they'd slowly managed to regain and gain some of their great peaks again. But it was, and then obviously Forest were, I think they're still in the second division at the time, but they were it was after Derby's peak did Nottingham Forest begin to peak. But yeah. But at Town Ground, it was 25,000 of Wolverhampton Wanderers versus Blackburn Rovers. Hey, we got another one, just like the Old Trafford. But this is an old stadium, and this was on the 4th of March, 1893, Wolves versus Blackburn, as I said, in the FA Cup semi-final, actually, because they used to play the semi-finals and finals at neutral grounds, and it wasn't, I can't remember what precise year it was when they officially moved to Wembley, maybe something in the 1930s, where they actually started playing finals in it. But the best game that Nottingham Forest played was a 2-0 win over Ajax on the 9th of April 1980 in the Champions League semi-finals. I could have been biased and been like, oh yeah, when Derby beat Forest at some other time, maybe Deforestation Day. But no, I'll be kind and say it is their semi-finals victories over Ajax. But the best one at the Town Ground was the Sheffield Wednesday beating Bolton Wanderers 3-1 on the 28th of March 1996 in another FA Cup semi-final. So, ironically, I think Nottingham Forest's old stadium was definitely better for not Forest people. But the opening game at the City Ground was Forest losing 1-0 against Blackburn Rovers on the 3rd of September 1898. Whereas the opening game at the Town Ground was Nottingham Forest beating the Scottish outfit Queen's Park 4-2 on the 2nd of October 1890 in a friendly. To be fair, Queen's Park, in the very early days of Scotland, were the best team from Glasgow. It wasn't until much later, not much later, but about 10 years later, did the real Rangers Celtic sort of take the four. And I'm going to say that the best stadium is Town Ground because the City Ground is awful. I'm joking. It is the City Ground. But I like how the Town Ground's main of the stats don't actually have Nottingham Forest in. On to Sheffield United. They've only ever played at Bramall Lane, an iconic stadium as well, which has a capacity of 32,050. Record attendance, though, is about double that of 68,287 in a Yorkshire derby with Sheffield United playing against Leeds United on the 15th of February 1936 in the FA Cup 5th round. Now, the FA Cup as it is, I mean, just to be in the FA Cup 5th round would have been a great tie, but a Yorkshire derby as well, it was definitely a day to remember. But the best game has got to be the Sheffield United 6-0 drumming over Tottenham Hotspur on the 2nd of March 1993. Now, I may be being a bit disingenuous here, but the Sheffield United teams of today, having experienced some thrashings, you could argue that one of the away teams at Sheffield United could claim that title, but the 6-0 scoreline for years was a record of the Premier League's biggest defeat. So it's got to be the Sheffield United Tottenham one. And the opening game, Sheffield 0, Hallam 0. 29th of December 1862. Actually, I believe that this is one of the earliest ever competitive fixtures of football. I believe. I mean, I don't know where Sheffield FC originally played. When they played, they played something like they just had weird games like teachers versus students or something like that. They just had a load of different weird competitive formats. But I know Sheffield v Hallam was the oldest ever game. I don't know if it was this particular game or whether it was slightly earlier, because I believe Hallam was formed earlier on. It was 1856, wasn't it? Sheffield in 1858, Hallam, or maybe 1858 Sheffield and 1816 Hallam. Someone correct me in the comments down below, but it was certainly an old affair between the two. So Tottenham Hotspur recently moving into their new stadium, or Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Well, it wasn't that recent, but it was definitely, it feels like only yesterday to me that they moved away from their beloved White Hart Lane. The capacity of the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium is 62,850, whereas White Hart Lane was much smaller. Its closure was 36,284. So they definitely needed to increase the capacity. But the record attendance is an interesting one because at the new stadium, it was only 62,027. We've still got another 800 to go before they get anywhere near the record. That was Tottenham versus Arsenal of the North London derby on the 12th of May 2022. Inevitably so, it would be. But the capacity, interestingly, the White Hart Lane one is record attendance is 75,038. Mental attendances. And this was a game of Tottenham versus Sunderland. Yeah, so the Mackhams must have driven a fair amount of people towards London itself, because we know how much the Mackhams support football. And on the 5th of March 1938, in an FA Cup 6th round tie, I mean, bearing in mind Sunderland, big force in the 1930s as well. So definitely huge tie. But the best game at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, Tottenham Hotspur 5, Burnley 0. That was on the 7th of December 2019. We have quite a small pool, obviously, to choose. So it was mainly which one is going to be the biggest, score line and stuff like that. You could argue it would be one of the London derbies, but yeah. And Tottenham, but I'm arguing the North London derby at White Hart Lane of Tottenham Hotspur beating Arsenal 5-1 on the 22nd of January 2008 in an EFL Cup semi-final has got to be up there as one of the greatest games that Tottenham have ever been in. So yeah, the opening game of Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I didn't know whether to include this one is or not, but I'm going to say it. It's for Tottenham Hotspur under 18s, winning 3-1 versus Southampton under 18s. You could argue, oh, that's not a senior fixture, whereas, well, you could have made that argument about some of them, I suppose. But that was on the 24th of March 2019, and it is technically a fixture. It would have had like 2 people attending, but even so. Whereas the opening of White Hart Lane was Tottenham Hotspur beating Notts County 4-1 on the 4th of September 1899 in the friendly. And let us not forget that Notts County during the 1890s were one heck of a force to be dealt with. They went on some fantastic FA Cup runs during the 1880s and 1890s. But I think sentimentality does trump for me. This one, I think it is White Hart Lane. It did need a bigger capacity when it closed, so I can understand why they moved. But you can't take away the memories with White Hart Lane. West Ham United, where we've got the current London Stadium, or Olympic Stadium, or whatever you want to call it, and the old bowling ground. The current capacity of the London Stadium is 66,000. It's huge. We're never really going to reach it, are they? Whereas the bowling ground was only 35,016. But the record attendances are an interesting comparison. The record attendance is for the London Stadium is 62,449. So that's a lot of fans. And it was actually West Ham versus Brighton on the 21st of August 2022, which is quite a striking one considering they've had some European fixtures and stuff like that. Whereas for the bowling ground, it was 42,322 with a London derby of West Ham United versus Tottenham Hotspur on the 17th of October 1970. Let's not forget that just before the 1970s started, in the 1960s, West Ham United were a great team. They had that iconic trio that helped England win the 1966 World Cup. Tottenham at the beginning of the 60s were great, but they weren't as much towards the end. But it would have been a great day out. The best game would have been at London Stadium for me. West Ham United beating Sevilla 2-0 on the 17th of March 2022 in that Europa League round of 16 fixture. Great European night, all things considering, and it really started to make the London Stadium feel like a home for the Hammers. Whereas another European night is probably the bowling ground, with West Ham United beating Eintracht Frankfurt 3-1 on the 14th of April 1976 in the Cup Winners' Cup semi-final. I believe they went on to win the Cup Winners' Cup that year. I could be wrong. But it was really sort of huge stuff. Like West Ham obviously have experience in Europe throughout their years, and this is an integral part of it. So, but I don't believe West Ham have ever actually won a title. I could be wrong. They may have actually just been fortunate by positioning a lot of time in Europe. The opening game of London Stadium was West Ham United winning 3-0 over a team called NK Domžale. I think they're Bosnian. I could be wrong, but they've opened the game on the 4th of August 2016. Whereas the bowling ground's opening game was such a interesting game. If that was the opening one of the London Stadium, you would have known about it. West Ham United won 3-0 against Millwall on the 1st of September 1904. That must have been a feisty affair. I think the bowling ground's history is what makes it the better stadium. But, and this is a big but, I think I have changed my mind over the last season and a half to think that the London Stadium is now better. Now, don't shoot me, but I think the Hammers are beginning to accept it as home, and it has become a huge atmosphere and a huge day out. Yeah. Final one of the Premier League is Wolverhampton Wanderers. They had the Molineux has been their ground for years, well beyond living in memory. But they did originally play at Dudley Road, and I will compare some of the stuff. And we don't know the capacity of Dudley Road, but we do know that Molineux is 31,750. But I will go into some of the other things, because we do have that. The record attendance at Molineux is almost 30,000 more the capacity is now at 61,315, with the Wolves versus Liverpool affair on the 11th of February 1939. Now, this would have been a big time, I think, throughout most of history, but with various teams being considered the favourite, I think. I don't know who the favourite would have been that day, but it would have definitely been a great game. Whereas Dudley Road's max attendance was 10,000. It was Wolverhampton Wanderers versus Sheffield Wednesday on the 2nd of March 1889 in the FA Cup third round. To be fair, admittedly, both of these teams would have been considered as high-rising favourites, especially Wolves in the Football League at the time would have been probably considered as winners, but Sheffield Wednesday had caused some considerable upsets on the route to get to this round, so it would have definitely been one for who would go all the way. The best game at Molineux is Wolverhampton Wanderers 2-1 winners over Juventus back in the 22nd of March 1972 in the UEFA Cup quarter-final. Now, not many people remember that Wolves were European giant, well, not quite giants, but certainly up there. They got to the semi-finals, let's consider that. As opposed, most people, when they say Wolves in Europe, will think of the last few years that they had under mainly under Nuno Espirito Santo, and that sort of, was it 3 seasons in a row getting, or at least 2 seasons in a row getting 7th, and therefore originally getting Europa League and then getting Conference. Well, it was Europa League both seasons, wasn't it? Or maybe Europa League one season. It was, and they had a red into it. But I definitely think the UEFA Cup quarterfinal wins it. But at Dudley Road, it's the Wolverhampton Wanderers beating a team called Stafford Road 5-0. Now, this may not seem like a huge fixture, but Stafford Road at this time were a decent team. This was on the 16th of February, again my birthday, back in 1884. And Stafford Road were actually a big team in the Black Country during this time. And this was actually in the Wrekin Cup, I believe in the Wrekin Cup final, or at least it may not be the final, but it was one of the fixtures that Wolves won when they went to go and win the Wrekin Cup that year, which was the first piece of silverware that Wolves ever won. But admittedly, I don't think many people would be caring about that when it comes to it. The opening game at Molineux was Wolves winning 2-0 against Notts County on the 7th of September 1889. I would certainly have said that Notts County would have been a big occasion, maybe not as much as today, because today Notts County, unfortunately, they are rising. I reckon they're currently like 5th in League 2, aren't they? I reckon there's a chance of them getting promoted this season, so we'll watch out for that, but it definitely would have been much bigger in the first division affair back in them days. Whereas the opening one at Dudley Road, we think there may have been earlier ones, but the ones that I found was Wolverhampton Wanderers drawing 0-0 with a team called Walsall Alma Athletic. I've never heard of that team before in my life. But that was on the 29th of October 1881 in the Birmingham Cup. Wow, that's must be an old competition, actually, than the Birmingham Cup. I don't know how far back that goes, but I know Wolves were established in 1877 as Wolverhampton St. Luke's. Yeah. Birmingham City, so we're down a level into the Championship now. Their home ground originally was originally Munch Street before they moved to St Andrews. Now the capacity of St Andrews is 2009. Interestingly, Munch Street is actually higher at 30,000, only marginally. But the record attendance at St Andrews is 67,341. It was a huge tie. It was for both the teams were wearing blue, Birmingham City versus Everton on the 11th of February 1939 in the FA Cup 5th round. Let's not get this wrong. Everton, huge club during this time. Definitely in the first division, I would imagine. Birmingham, probably also in the first division, probably not. I'm not entirely sure whereabouts they would have been. Whereas in Munch Street, we know that it was over 28,000. We don't have the official figures because it's quite old, of the second city derby. Birmingham City versus Aston Villa on the 25th of February 1905. And nobody could tell me that would not have been a great affair. From what we get told, that the Villa fans were quite annoyed because there were too many people for the stadium, even though they said the capacity was 30,000. But there was a lot of policing concerns about a match. The best game at St Andrews was Birmingham City's 3-1 win after extra time against West Ham United. It would have been 1-1 after ordinary time, and then Birmingham scored 2 late goals in extra time to seal it on the 26th of January 2011 in the EFL Cup semi-final, which led to Birmingham City actually winning the EFL Cup, I believe. Whereas the best one at Munch Street was Birmingham City thrashing Grimsby Town 8-3 on the 25th of February. Again, 25th of February. Huge day apparently for Munch Street in 1893. Now, that would have been in the second division, I believe, at that time, that had been formed. But yeah, it was certainly a game to watch. 8-3. Could you imagine being a Blues fan in that crowd? The opening game at St Andrews was a 0-0 draw played between Birmingham City and Middlesbrough on Boxing Day in 1906. Whereas Birmingham City's opening game at Munch Street was a 5-0 win over a team called Saltley College on the 11th of September 1877. Crikey, that goes far back. Blackburn Rovers currently play at Ewood Park, but did you know they originally played at Leamington Road? Now, the capacity of Ewood Park is 31,367. However, we don't really know Leamington Road's full capacity. What we do know, though, is the rest of the stats. And the record attendance at Ewood Park is 61,783 in a tie which contained Blackburn Rovers playing, you could argue, local rivals Bolton Wanderers. I know that Blackburn v Preston or Blackburn v Burnley is sometimes considered a more bigger derby, but Bolton is still, I reckon, a local derby. It happened on the 2nd of March 1929, the FA Cup 6th round. So again, it would have been really far into a competition, but both teams being very much favourites for it. Blackburn maybe marginally more so, but yeah. Whereas at Leamington Road, the record attendance was only 15,000. But as I said, the local derby of Blackburn Rovers, this is Preston North End in the sort of Lancashire derby, if you will. I don't know if they have the official name for that, because I know there's the East Lancashire derby, which is Burnley versus Blackburn, and the West one, which is Preston versus Blackpool. But that was on the 2nd of November 1889. Must have been a good affair. The best game at Ewood Park was Blackburn Rovers drumming, if you will, 4-1 Newcastle United on the 14th of January 1928 in the FA Cup 3rd round. Certainly would have been a big occasion. I think Blackburn went on to win the FA Cup that year. I could be wrong about that. But certainly did well in it. Whereas at Leamington Road, Blackburn Rovers beat Staveley 7-1 on the 23rd of January 1886 in the FA Cup 5th round. Now, this may not seem like anything because no one's ever heard of Staveley before. Okay, yeah, who's that? Well, there is a current rendition of the Staveley Miners' Welfare, but they are in Tier 10, so don't really matter that much. However, Staveley in these days, they were like the perennial underdogs. They were the team which shocked a lot of people during the 1880s. But they were smashed by Blackburn, no upset and underdog mentality winning here. Blackburn, I believe, did go on to win the FA Cup this year. It was part of the 3 FA Cup triumphs in a row, I believe, which happened in the 1880s. Although I may be wrong about that as well. The opening game at Ewood Park was actually Birmingham City versus Sheffield Wednesday on the 9th of April in 1881. I believe it was originally opened in an FA Cup game. That sounds like it would be. I'm not entirely sure why they would either have the possession or want to play at Ewood Park in any other form. Whereas the opening game at Leamington Road would have been a huge derby, with Blackburn Rovers beating Blackburn Olympic 4-1. I don't have a precise datage, but it was sometime in 1881. And that would have been massive. Blackburn Olympic went on to win the FA Cup during the 1880s. And Blackburn Rovers also did. So there were two very big teams. Bristol City. Now they play at Ashton Gate at the moment, but they used to play at St John's Lane. The capacity of Ashton Gate is 27,000. We don't quite know St John's Lane's capacity, so that is unfortunate. The record attendance at Ashton Gate is 43,335, with a game of Bristol City versus Preston North End. That was also my birthday in 1935. I'm not entirely sure why that was such a big game, because neither team were doing... I mean, actually, Preston were doing all right, but honestly, I can't think why that would have had a record attendance. Whereas St John's Lane's max attendance was 17,909. That was Bristol City versus Sheffield United on the 6th of February 1904. That is more understandable. Sheffield United were newly... We weren't new, admitted. They were challengers, I think, for the top First Division title in a few years' time, anyhow, if it wasn't that precise year. The best game at Ashton Gate is Bristol City beating Bristol Rovers 4-2. The iconic Bristol derby. They would have been much closer as well. It was the 8th of December 1945 in the FA Cup second round. Both teams from the Third Division South, with Bristol City having a marginally better season, finishing in the top 5, I believe, whereas Bristol Rovers were in the bottom half. But I think any triumph over the near city rivals would definitely be a triumph that I don't think would be considered as big nowadays, but would have definitely been considered huge back in them days. Whereas the best game at St John's Lane is Bristol City beating Southampton 5-2 on the 15th of January 1898 in the Southern League. I think they went on to win the Southern League that year, but also the fact that Southampton were one of the stronger outfits as well in the Southern League. The opening game at Ashton Gate, we don't actually know what it was, because we know it was a Bedminster club whose records have largely been lost to history because it was back in 1887. Whereas the opening game at St John's Lane was Bristol City beating Slough 5-1 on the 5th of October 1895 in the FA Cup preliminary round. So this was like well early qualification stages. The preliminary round only had like 2 or 3 teams during this time. So it was definitely... It's interesting that the opening of Ashton Gate is earlier than St John's Lane, but they weren't used by Bristol City until afterwards. Cardiff City, obviously with a current boring name of Cardiff City Stadium, and Ninian Park being their traditional home. The current capacity of Cardiff City Stadium is quite big for the Championship, 33,280, whereas Ninian Park was only 21,508. The record attendance, though, at Cardiff City Stadium was 33. They actually maxed out. I won't repeat the number. They got 100%, not a single seat empty. This wasn't Cardiff City, though. This was Wales versus Belgium on the 12th of June 2015, which I believe was a fairly big game. I do think it was just a friendly, but it may have been a Euros qualifier. It was Belgium, obviously, being a very big team. They were just approaching their golden generation. Players like Kevin De Bruyne, Eden Hazard, Romelu Lukaku, Thibaut Courtois, Alderweireld, all quite young, and they were dubbed the golden generation. Obviously, coming third place in only 3 years' time. So, yeah, it would have been a huge one. Well, as Ninian Park's record attendance does sort of put that to shame, though, with 62,634 in a Wales versus England encounter. That Wales versus England is always a big affair, but this was on the 17th of October 1959 as well. So consider how passionate the international stage was then. Um, it would have definitely had a lot of things. The best game at Cardiff City Stadium was Real Madrid 2-0 winners over Sevilla on the 12th of August in 2014 UEFA Super Cup. Um, Ironically, the best game at Ninian Park also involves Real Madrid, but this is when Cardiff City beat them narrowly, only 1-0 winners on the 10th of March 1971 in the Cup Winners' Cup quarter-finals. We don't talk about what happened in the second leg, just like with Derby. We don't talk about what happened in the second leg against Real Madrid. We'll do that in the next episode of this. But it is definitely something which I think all Bluebirds fans wear as a sort of badge of honour. The opening game at Cardiff City Stadium was a 0-0 draw played between the one of the most iconic clubs in Wales and one of the most iconic clubs in Scotland, a 0-0 draw between Cardiff City and Celtic on the 22nd of July 2009 in a friendly. You know what? I think we do actually need to see more of that. I think we need to see. I would like to see like a British Cup of some sort. Like, I don't know, it could be the top 5. Like, I don't know, the winners of all the FA Cups in the 4 British nations and the winners of the League Cups in all 4 nations. And maybe like the winner of, or maybe just the 2 cups, because I think the Premier League clubs would complain too much. And it could be done during pre-season, as a sort of like pre-season campaign. And it would only involve like 3 fixtures. So it wouldn't matter that much. It would be quite an interesting concept to see. Anyhow, that's me waffling. Cardiff City opening game at Ninian Park was a 2-1 loss to Aston Villa on the 1st of September 1910, which was quite credible in a friendly because Aston Villa were high flyers in the First Division at the time and Cardiff City were in the Southern League. So it was considered quite a result to only come away with a 2-1 loss, even though it was a friendly. Coventry City, they currently play at the Coventry Building Society Arena, CBS Arena, I will be referring to it as now on, or Rico, as I always know it as. And they originally played at Highfield Road. I actually did ask my dad for some of these because he is a Coventry City fan. So, and he has seen everything at Coventry. Well, he knows a lot about the Coventry Building Society Arena, whereas he had some experiences at Highfield. He's not quite as old as 1899, though. The capacity at Coventry Building Society Arena is 32,753. While Highfield Road was paled a bit, it was 23,489. But the record attendances, though, was different. The record attendance in the Coventry Building Society Arena don't even have Coventry in it. It was 32,128 when it was England women versus Italy women on the 19th of February 2023 or 2023, which was early on this year. It was the Arnold Clark Cup. I believe it was the final, but I could be wrong about that. The Arnold Clark Cup, it's a cup competition which is invitational only. I don't really see the purpose in it. Someone can maybe enlighten me on that. But yeah. Whereas Highfield Road, it was 51,455. Bit of a local derby in the West Midlands, Coventry City versus Wolverhampton Wanderers in the 29th of April 1967. As I said, Wolves were high-flying at this time. Coventry were sort of, they were mildly, I think they were First Division, but they weren't mid-table, I want to say, weren't great. But the best game at Coventry Building Society Arena, this is what I asked my dad, and he said it's got to be Coventry City beating Gillingham 1-0 on the 5th of September 2014. And most people will be like, what, only a 1-0 win versus Gillingham? That's an absolute boring game. And like, what on earth? This is in League Two. Like, Coventry have had much better days. It's the occasion, not the result. Because it was the return from exile. They came back from Sixfield Stadium in Northampton and they had returned to the Rico. And it was a sign of better things to come. And then they went to Birmingham again and then they came back. But yes, it is definitely one of the... Emotionally, it was a better game, I suppose you could say. Sometimes emotion does triumph the actual result. Whereas at Highfield Road, I gotta say, we gotta. I had some from my dad, several items that he put down. He put the last game at Highfield Road, which Coventry beat Derby in, but I chose this one mainly because Coventry City, I think, went through to the final of this competition, as when Coventry City beat Nottingham Forest 5-4, which is an absolute cracker of a result. I think we can all testify, if we sat in the stand and watched a 5-4 result, we would have no nails left and it would be an amazing game. And this happened on the 28th of November 1990 in the EFL Cup fourth round. It was certainly an occasion. It would have been a great day out, and maybe it was a semi-finals they reached, but definitely led that Coventry were definitely sort of having what I would say is a peak. They won the FA Cup a few years prior to that, and they were in the first division, later the Premier League. Everything was going amazingly well for the Sky Blues. And by the way, they would have been better well-known Sky Blues at the time. The opening game, the CBS, was Coventry beating QPR 3-0 on the 20th of August 2005. Whereas that would have been a Premier League encounter as well. Whereas Highfield Road opened in an interesting tie. It was Coventry City winning 1-0 over Shrewsbury Town on the 9th of September 1899 in the Birmingham District League. Yeah, a bit of a boring game. That's for an opening game, but yeah. Huddersfield Town, there's the John Smith Stadium, which, by the way, I know it's a sponsorship of alcohol, but it is the most iconically boring English name. You like, if you thought, oh, what would an English stadium be called? John Smith Stadium. Yeah, that sort of feeling. Whereas they originally played at Leeds Road, which is also quite basic as well. The capacity of John Smith's is actually 24,121, which is way less than Leeds Road, which was 52,000. Like, let's just consider that. But the record attendance for John Smith's was 24,263. So somehow they managed to skirt around the rulings of not being able to break their record attendance, and somehow they did. Like, because this was well after the Taylor Report, because Huddersfield Town versus Liverpool in the 20th of October 2018, back in the Premier League, where was it that season they got relegated, or was it the season after? And that was one where they stayed up by the skin of their teeth. I cannot remember. I always confuse the two. I think it was the one they got relegated in. But the record attendance at Leeds Road was 67,037, with Huddersfield Town versus Arsenal, the Herbert Chapman Derby, on the 27th of February 1932 in the FA Cup sixth round. Both teams were doing phenomenally well. I think Herbert Chapman had just left the season prior, having led Huddersfield to their third FA Cup, their third title, and an FA Cup the previous season, whereas he had gone to Arsenal and won the first division that campaign. And I'm not entirely sure who won the FA Cup that season. I think it was Huddersfield. It was an absolute bliss. It would have been an absolute amazing. Could you just imagine, like, in comparison today, it would be if Manchester City were playing Liverpool. It would have been that levels of sort of stuff, and not this season, but like a couple seasons back, like just after Liverpool had won the title and Manchester City had won a couple afterwards. It would have been just an amazing day out. But the best game at Huddersfield Town is actually a 2-2 draw with Barnsley on the 4th of May 2013. But it isn't the fact that they drew against a local rival. It was a fact that meant they stayed up on the final day of the season, with absolute scenes ensuing. Because I think it was a last-minute goal which stayed them up as well. Whereas the best one at Leeds Road was Huddersfield Town running out 5-0 winners against Manchester United. Now, I don't care if Manchester United weren't that good. It was 13th of March 1926. But any time beating Manchester United 5-0 definitely warrants for me a place in the history books as one of the better games. But the opening game of John Smith's was actually a loss of Huddersfield losing 1-0 to Wycombe Wanderers on the 20th of August 1994. Not so much glory days at Huddersfield there. I think it was in League One, and they got relegated that season or something. It was absolute torrid time for the Terriers fans. Whereas Leeds Road's opening game was a bit of a local rivalry. Huddersfield Town beating Bradford Park Avenue 2-1 on the 2nd of September 1908. And this was proper Park Avenue. This was like their best season, because Bradford Park Avenue were originally quite a big club. Believe it or not, they were actually at one point the bigger of the two clubs in Bradford. Not anymore, now that they're in the Northern Premier League and really quite struggling in the Northern Premier League from what I have seen. They sacked their manager a few weeks ago. Yeah, it was only a few weeks ago. I believe I was relatively up to date with that. Hull City currently play at the MKM Stadium, or the KCOM Stadium, as old schoolers like me like to refer to it as. But they originally played at Boothbury Park. Now, the capacity of MKM is 25,586, which is a solid 10,000 more than the 15,160 at Boothbury. The record at the MKM is 25,030, where Hull City played Liverpool on the 9th of May 2010. Both teams in the Premier League, Liverpool doing wonders. They, I think, was it 2010 that they went on to win the league with that like iconic players like Suarez, Steven Gerrard, and stuff like that? Or was it a few seasons, give or take, either way? I can't remember. But they were definitely a big team. Whereas the record for Boothbury is actually 55,019 when Hull played the other huge club who play in red, as one of the 3 huge clubs who play in red, of Manchester United on the 26th of February 1949 in the FA Cup 6th round. And you've got to bear in mind at this point in time, Hull were minnows. Like, they were generally like, they weren't huge. I think they were like 3rd division, maybe 2nd division, but they weren't great. So what an FA Cup tie. I think they were 3rd division and they went on a bit of a run. The best game at the MKM is Hull City 2-2 with Cardiff City on the 4th of May 2013. I believe that sealed them to get 2nd spot promotion to the Premier League, actually, that result. I think that's why I've chosen that one, because the scenes at the end, because they got promoted, we don't talk about how bad they were really the season after. We had people like Curtis Davis in that team, Tom Huddleston. Was it Eves? Tommy's? I'm not sure about that one. But they had some absolutely great players in that team. Whereas Boothbury Park's best one was actually a 1-1 draw, but then they lost 4-3 on penalties against Manchester United on the 5th of August 1970 in the Watney Cup semi-final. Now, if you don't know what the Watney Cup is, what is the Watney Cup? Well, that was a competition that was played between the top 4 divisions' top goal scorers, like top goal scoring teams in each one. So Manchester United were in like the top flight and Hull City were in like the 3rd division. So the fact they even managed to drew them to a 1-apiece draw, I completely get what the purpose of the Watney Cup is. And many people are like, well, what was the purpose of it? Well, pre-season friendlies weren't that big of a thing, so they more had competitions like this. And could you imagine if, like, the logic is, okay, so the best scoring in each, like, could you imagine the amount of goals that would be? That must have been a conversation. Like, could you imagine the amount of goals we'd get if we have the top scorers in each? So that was the concept of it. I think Derby did win the Watney Cup the season after, to be fair, in 1971. The opening game at the KCOM was Hull City winning 1-0 against Sunderland. I don't know if you'd call that a local rivalry. It's a bit of a stretch, isn't it? It's just there's not many teams between or nearby Hull. That was on the 18th of December 2002 as a friendly. What would have been maybe a more local rivalry is Hull City drawing 0 goals apiece with Lincoln City on the 31st of August 1946. Would have been like a 3rd division affair. 3rd division north, actually, probably. Ipswich Town currently play at Portman Road. They interestingly didn't really play at Broomhill Park, not much is known about that. We don't know a capacity or record attendance. But the capacity of Portman Road is 29,673, and the record attendance is 38,010 of Ipswich Town versus Leeds United on the 8th of March 1975. So, yeah, that would have been peak time for Leeds. Leeds would have won the first division. Ipswich were gradually rebuilding up into a team that would be. They were second division at the time, but in a few seasons' time, they went on to won the first division in 1981, and then the UEFA in 1980-81, and then won the 1981 UEFA Cup, I believe. So that is like mental. The stages of that, and the best game at Portman Road, I think, was Ipswich Town winning 5-3 against Bolton Wanderers. That alone is a huge scoreline. But the occasion is even better. It was on the 17th of May, year 2000, in the Division 1 playoff semi-final second leg. So I believe they were already, they were 1-0 behind in the game from the first leg. And they were drawing 3-3 until the fine, and it went into the 90 minutes. And then in the 93rd and the 97th minute, they scored 2 more from the 3-3 to get it to 5-3 and progressed. I believe that's what happened, and it was one of the most exciting playoff semi-finals of all time. And definitely shows why we need the playoffs more in football, not less. Whereas the best game at Broomhill Park was the only one I could really find that was good. Ipswich Town won 15-0 against a team called East Stamford in 1881. Yeah. I bet you knew about that. I have no idea who East Stamford is, but 15-0 sounds good. The opening game at Portman Road did involve Ipswich Town in 1884, but we don't know who it was against. Ipswich Town won 6-1 in their opening game at Broomhill Park against a team called Stoke Wanderers on the 2nd of November 1878. Leeds United have only ever played at Ellen Road. That has a capacity of 37,792. A record attendance of 57,892, though, was set when Leeds played Sunderland. Obviously, Sunderland have quite a lot of record attendances on the 15th of March 1967. Obviously, Leeds were trying to compete for the titles at that time against Derby. But the best game for Leeds, unfortunately, I do have to say this, was Leeds United beating Derby 4-3 on the 11th of November 1997. Although you could argue the reverse fixture, if you want, for Derby County fans, at Ellen Road, the reverse fixture being the one in the semi-finals of the playoffs back in 2019. The opening game at Ellen Road was Hunslet winning 1-0 against Harrogate Town. Now, Hunslet were neither of these teams. It's weird because neither teams were home sides. So why did Hunslet and Harrogate Town play in this stadium? And 1-0 for Hunslet. Congratulations. Not very around anymore. But on the 23rd of April, 1898, was actually where the West Yorkshire Cup final was being held. Now, I don't understand why Ellen Road, which didn't have any other teams in it, hosted the West Yorkshire Cup final, but they did. That was their first game. Leicester City currently play at the King Power Stadium, but they used to play at the Filbo or the Filbert Street Stadium. The capacity of King Power is 32,262, and Filbert's is 42,000. Record attendance at King Power was 32,241, set when Leicester City played Sunderland on the 8th of August 2015. Now, that was the opening day of the season that Leicester City were back in the Premier League, I believe. So it was one full of expectations. Whereas Filbert Street's record was 47,298 in a game between Leicester and Tottenham Hotspur on the 18th of February 1928 in an FA Cup 5th round fixture. Now, Leicester were a much smaller club back in the 1920s. So to be in the fifth round of the FA Cup was huge as it is, because they were in the second division, I think, at the time, and not a strong second division outfit either. The best game at King Power was Leicester City beating Sevilla 2-0 on the 14th of March 2017 in their Champions League round of 16. They obviously had won the Premier League the season before, and they had therefore entered the Premier League. The Champions League. And then they did pretty well, to the surprise of many. They were always shockers, weren't they? Every single shock that they could turn on their head has happened. And we're probably going to get back to the Premier League next season, by the looks of it. But the best one at Filbert Street was Leicester City beating Chelsea 2-1 on the 3rd of February 2001. Chelsea was still a big team at this time. They weren't as big as maybe people consider them to be now, but Leicester were a small club, and Chelsea was still considered a big club, so it did come as a bit of a shock. The opening game of the King Power was a 1-1 draw between Leicester and Athletic Bilbao on the 4th of August 2002 in a friendly. Obviously, the Basque outfit only have Basque players, so it would have been an interesting game, I reckon. Whereas the opening game at Filbert Street would have been a local derby at the time. It was Leicester City losing 2-1 to Loughborough Town on the 28th of November 1891. I don't know I don't know if it was a friendly and what league they were playing in, but it was an interesting dynamic between the two. Middlesbrough currently play at Riverside Stadium, but they did play at Ayresome Park. The current capacity of Riverside is 34,742. One of the biggest, not quite compared to Sunderland's, but I think it's the second biggest in the Championship in terms of capacity. But Ayresome Park's was 26,667. The record attendance at Riverside actually broke that capacity, thereby breaking the rules in a way, of 34,836, when Middlesbrough played Norwich City on the 28th of December 2004. Both teams, I think, were vying to get promotion back to the Premier League at the time, but I'm not sure. They could have been in the Premier League. On 53,802 was the Middlesbrough v Newcastle United, which was a record attendance at Ayresome Park, which was on the 27th of December 1949, which is unbelievably, that would have been considered a huge game. I would say Middlesbrough v Newcastle now would probably not be as considered as huge, but back then it would have been. The best game, though, as at the Riverside, was Middlesbrough's 8-1 thrashing over Manchester City on the 11th of May 2008, which I believe was the last game that Manchester City played before the the City Group, or whatever you want to call it, UAE or Abu Dhabi or whatever you want to call them, took over Manchester City. Clearly, and it also led to the sacking, I think, of City's manager at the time. Whereas at Ayresome Park, I've not chosen a Middlesbrough game, actually. I've chosen North Korea's shock 1-0 win over Italy in the 19th of July 1966 in the World Cup Group D. Now, the fact that North Korea beat Italy at this time were considered almost guaranteed, and it was like a group of death for North Korea. This is the biggest result in North Korea's entire history. That's not even overstating it. So I've got to say that it has got to go to that, just for the shock factor alone. The opening game at Riverside was Middlesbrough beating Chelsea 2-0 on the 26th of August 1995. Would have been in the Premier League, I imagine. But yeah. Ayresome Park was opened by Middlesbrough winning 1-0 against Celtic on the 1st of September 1903 in a friendly. Not much about that. Millwall, the New Den and the Old Den. It was quite hard doing research for this because lots of the time they did not very well distinguish between the two. The capacity of the New Den is 20,146, whereas the Old Den actually recorded, had a capacity of 22,000, had higher attendances than that, but yeah. Record attendance at the New Den was 20,093 for a game of Millwall versus Arsenal on the 10th of January 1994 in an FA Cup third round. I don't think Millwall were in the Premier League at the time, but Arsenal were obviously quite one of them teams that was considered to be quite a high flyer and was maybe a shock upset on the starts. Whereas the Old Den had a record of 48,672, when Millwall played against Derby County on the 20th of February 1937. Millwall at that time were in the 3rd Division South, I believe, whereas Derby were either in the 1st Division or the 2nd Division, but were still considered a huge scalp if they could win that. So it would have been, or maybe they were in the same league. I didn't write down an FA Cup, which I normally do. Maybe we were in the same league, and maybe we were both in the 2nd Division. But I think Derby were well predicted for winning it. The best game was Millwall winning 4-1 at the New Den against West Ham United on the 21st of March 2004. Cannot be denied. It was truly like an amazing win against your local rivals as well. Whereas Millwall won 6-0 against Brighton and Hove Albion on the 21st of January 1928, which sealed them promotion from the 3rd Division South to the 2nd Division. I believe the first time in their history. The opening game at the New Den was Millwall beating Sporting Club de Portugal 2-1, which I think many people have also regarded as maybe the best game. But it is only a friendly. It was on the 4th of August 1993. But it was definitely like Sporting Club de Portugal were a huge, huge team at the time. And Millwall were only in the second, they called it the 1st Division, didn't they? Because of the Premier League recently forming. Millwall lost 1-0 at the Old Den against Brighton and Hove Albion as well on the 22nd of October 1910, and that was their opening game at that stadium. Norwich City currently play at Carrow Road, but they also, as I alluded to earlier, used to play at the Nest. The capacity of Carrow Road is 27,359. Whereas the Nest, we don't know precisely, but it was approximately 15,000. The record attendance at Carrow Road was 43,984 for a game of Norwich City versus Leicester City on the 30th of March 1963 in the FA Cup 6th round. What a game. 25,037 was the maximum record attendance on the Nest. That's what it's called, isn't it? I've got the notes in front of me. What am I doing? Yeah, it was Norwich City against Sheffield Wednesday on the 16th of February 1935 in the FA Cup 5th round. So Sheffield Wednesday arguably would have been a bigger pod, I would say. Not discrediting Leicester City, but they weren't a huge club and never have been until recently, where Sheffield Wednesday were definitely up there as one of the better clubs in the 1930s, if not the best. So, maybe you can make an argument for Huddersfield and Arsenal, but Sheffield Wednesday were definitely approaching peak powers at the time. The best game at Carrow Road was Norwich City 2-0, winning up against Ipswich Town, obviously, East Anglian derby, on the 6th of March 1985 in the EFL Cup semi-final, which would have been even more greater going into the final. And then a final they won, I believe. Yep. I could have been wrong about that, but I'm pretty certain they won that. And for the Nest, it was Norwich City. They did lose 1-0 against Arsenal on the 6th of May 1935 in what's called the Norwich Hospital Charity Cup. But Norwich City during this time were a nobody club. Generally, nobody had ever heard of Norwich City. Arsenal were the best team in the land, and to hold them to only 1-0 is a respectable scoreline. The opening game at Carrow Road was Norwich City winning 4-3 against West Ham United on the 31st of August 1935, which would have been a great game to watch, I can imagine, and a symbol of signs to come, maybe. Whereas the opening game at Nest was a 0-0 draw between Norwich City and Portsmouth on the 12th of September 1908. Plymouth Argyle, they only have ever played at Home Park, which has a capacity of 17,900. had a record attendance of 43,596, though, in a game of Plymouth versus Aston Villa on the 10th of October 1936. Villa always had been a huge club, especially at this time. Plymouth, not so much. So I'm not entirely sure what competition that was in. I don't know if they were actually, whether Villa were going through a tough period or not. Maybe in the second division, I'm not sure. The best game, though, was definitely Plymouth Argyle winning 7-0 against Chesterfield on the 3rd of January 2004, which is just one of the many games that they won. But it was A, for the emphatic scoreline, and B, for the many that they won during the campaign, which ensured their promotion to the Championship for the first time in the second flight for absolutely years. The opening game at Home Park, though, was Plymouth Argyle winning 2-0 against Northampton Town on the 5th of September 1903. That would have been some... I don't know how many fans they would have got, but I don't think that many for that sort of fixture. Preston North End, traditionally most people know about Deepdale and how old that is. But I did also play at a ground called Moor Park before then, but we don't know anything about it, so I won't be mentioning anything about that ground. But Deepdale has a capacity of 23,408, although the record attendance was 42,684 in a game of Preston North End versus Arsenal on the 23rd of April 1938. Obviously, as I said, Arsenal doing well during this time. Preston being very, I think, like 18th or something, or quite lower in the first division. So it would have been quite a good game for Preston fans if they wanted to cause an upset. The best game, though, was the record scoreline of an FA Cup fixture, with Preston North End winning 26-0 against Hyde FC on the 15th, the predecessor of Hyde United, of course, on the 15th of October 1887 in the FA Cup first round. It was in this competition that Preston North End actually went to go and win the 1887-88 FA Cup, as well as the 1887-88 Football League, being Invincibles, and just the emphatic win of a 26-0 win against Hyde United just sums up what a dominant team that was. The opening game, though, actually saw Preston North End lose 1-0 against a team called Eagly on the 5th of October 1878. Queen's Park Rangers play currently at Loftus Road, although they did originally play at the Park Royal ground. The capacity of Loftus Road is 18,439, which is a minute figure considering that Park Royal ground had 60,000 capacity. The record attendance at Loftus Road was 35,353 of QPR versus Leeds United on the 27th of April 1974 in a season that I believe Leeds won the 1973-74 First Division title. So that's probably why. It isn't known what the record attendance of the Park Royal ground is. The best game was QPR beating Liverpool 3-2 in the 21st of March 2012, which ensured survival. They did survive that season of relegation, and obviously winning against Liverpool, huge sort of thing. It was part of what they needed. I think it was one of the two results they had in the last 2 months that enabled them to survive, because they had quite a poor end to the season, but the win against Liverpool meant they survived. Whereas the best one of the Royal Park round was QPR winning 5-0 against Coventry City on the 3rd of September 1910. I believe that season was when they won the 3rd Division South as well to gain promotion to the 2nd Division. So certainly it was quite a dominant season as well. The opening game at Loftus Road was Shepherd's Bush versus Old Malvernians on the 22nd of October 1904, because Shepherd's Bush was the original inhabitants of Loftus Road, whereas QPR was playing at the Park Royal ground at the time, and they opened that ground versus Millwall on the 2nd of November 1907. Bit of a derby, you could probably say. I'm not sure, maybe. Rotherham United currently play at the New York Stadium. although they historically played at Millmoor, which they've still not knocked down, by the way, which is just mental. So the capacity of the New York Stadium is 12,021, whereas Millmoor's was 8,300. Record attendance of the New York was 11,758 in a local derby which saw Rotherham United play against Sheffield United on the 7th of September 2013. What a game that would have been as well. I think it would have been in League... Would that have been League One at the time? Or was that the season that Sheffield United got relegated? Or was it the season that after the Rotherham... It was the season that Rotherham United got promoted. I'm not sure. Because either way, they were in the same league. Whereas Millmoor's record attendance was 25,170. Again, just like last time, it was the same fixture, Rotherham United versus Sheffield United. Just this was on the 13th of December, 1952. Oh, that's today. Can I be bothered to do that math? That was 71 years ago to this day. Just think about that. That was when Rotherham made their record attendance. The best game of the New York Stadium was when Rotherham United beat Sunderland 5-1 on the 30th of October 2021. So Rotherham got promoted in probably, I think that was their 6th win on the spin. All came in a 6-win run. It was, they got promoted. That's the season of 2021-22. And lots of people thought Sunderland were going to be favourites. And then, so the defeat of Sunderland by 5-1 is just proves amazing. Paul Ward masterclass, as you would say. Rotherham United versus Aston Villa, and a 2-0 win would be the best game at Millmoor, I'd say, on the 22nd of August 1961, which was actually the EFL Cup Finals first leg. I don't know if they actually went on to win that. I don't know what the second leg result was, but it was certainly, a final at Millmoor with that and winning of the home side. Yeah, that would be great. Opening game at New York Stadium was in 2012. It was Rotherham United versus Barnsley, a local derby as well. It was a 2-1 win for Rotherham on the 21st of July in 2012. But that was only a friendly. Yeah, definitely a friendly. Whereas the first one at Millmoor would have involved a team called Rotherham Church Institute in approximately 1895. We're not entirely sure much about them other than they were in the Sheffield Association League at the time. So, yeah. Sheffield Wednesday, they play at Hillsborough Stadium. They did actually have an older stadium called Olive Grove, which I will be telling you a bit about, which not many people know about. The capacity of Hillsborough was 39,732, whereas Olive Grove's was only 10,000, hence why they moved to Hillsborough, because it was too small. The record attendance at Hillsborough was 72,841 in a game that saw Sheffield Wednesday play against Manchester City on the 17th of February 1934 in the FA Cup quarter-finals. What a game that would have been. I think actually Sheffield Wednesday went on to do very well that FA Cup as well. Maybe even be finalists. Whereas 20,000 was a record attendance at Olive Grove, which actually a lot of people cited as a reason why they should find a new ground. But Sheffield Wednesday played against West Bromwich Albion on Valentine's Day in 1891. Not that that would have been celebrated as much as it is now. In the FA Cup third round. Again, two huge teams as well during the 1890s. I think West Brom went on to win that cup. Yeah. The best game at Hillsborough was when West Germany beat Uruguay 4-0 on the 23rd of July in the 1966 World Cup quarter-finals. That would have been some game. Because, Germany has always really been seen as a big side. Whereas Uruguay had won inaugural World Cups and were a good side during the 1950s, but by the 1960s, they were only a semi-decent outfit, hence the 4-0 drubbing. Olive Grove's best game was Sheffield Wednesday beating Sheffield United 2-1 in the Steel City derby on the 15th of December 1890. That I don't know how big they would have considered that derby then, but I think in retrospect we can definitely say it would have been a big game. Both teams in the second division at the time as well, so maybe the derby had slowly started to creep up. The opening game was Sheffield Wednesday beating Chesterfield 5-1. I don't know if you can count that as a local derby because they don't play each other that much, but they are near each other. That was on the 2nd of September 1899. Again, in the second division, I imagine. Sheffield Wednesday drew 4-4 for the opening game at Olive Grove against Blackburn Rovers. What an end-to-end game 4-4 would be on 12th of September 1887. Southampton currently play at St Mary's Stadium, but they used to play at the stadium called the Dell. And no, that's not a laptop. So St Mary's has a capacity of 32,384, whereas the Dell had a capacity of 15,200 at its closure. The record attendance at St Mary's was 32,363, which was a game which saw Southampton play against Coventry City on the 28th of April 2012, which I believe was the season that Southampton got promoted to the Premier League. And they've stayed there ever since last season. They got relegated. So it was quite a good innings. Whereas the Dell's record attendance was 31,044, which saw Southampton play Manchester United on the 8th of October 1969. Manchester United, very good team at that point in time. Southampton had only recently been climbing up the league to get into the first division. It would have been quite an interesting thing. The best game, though, at St Mary's was Southampton beating Inter Milan 2-1 in the 3rd of November 2016 in the Europa League group stage. To manage to beat Inter Milan at any time of a club of Southampton side would have been an impressive feat, but just in 2016 to have even made the Europa League. However, the best team game at the Dell was Southampton's dominant 5-0 performance against Tottenham on the 7th of May 1984, in a time when Tottenham were quite a good side. Like, it would have been no mean feat beating them. The opening game at St Mary's was Southampton's 4-3 loss against RC de Espanyol in the 1st of August 2001 in a friendly. Whereas the first game of Adele was Southampton marching out, where the Saints gone marching in, as they say, 4-1 against Brighton United on the 3rd of September 1898 in, I believe, the Southern League, when them teams were there. Stoke City currently play at the Bet365 Stadium, but they used to play at the Victoria Ground. Well, the current capacity of the Bet365 is 30,089, whereas the Victoria Grounds was 56,000. The record attendance at the Bet365 was 30,027, which saw a game of Stoke City versus Everton on the 17th of March 2018. Bit odd because that sounds like a very dead rubber game in the Premier League. Whereas the 51,380 that saw Stoke City play Arsenal on the 29th of March 1937 sounds a much more enticing game to watch. The best game of the Bet365 was Stoke City's 3-1 win over Arsenal on the 24th of January 2010 in the FA Cup 4th round. Obviously, Arsenal was starting to come to the end of the Arsene Wenger heydays. They were still a very good team who were regularly getting into the Champions League, but Stoke provided an upset. Whereas Stoke City's best game of Victoria Ground was a 2-1 win over Manchester United on the 15th of November 1971 in an EFL Cup 4th round second replay. Yeah, considering that this was the third time they drew each other, everybody was just like, can we just put the towel in now? But interestingly, Stoke City that campaign, I believe, went on to go, yes, they did, went on to go and win the EFL Cup, or the League Cup as it was called then. So that the fact alone that they managed to it isn't just the match against Manchester United, who were a big club. It was also the winning at the end of it. The opening game of the Bet365 was Stoke City 1, Rochdale 1 on the 27th of August 1997 in an EFL Cup fixture on the first round second leg. Considering that Rochdale even... Oh, no. I don't know. I don't know if it was just a two-legged affair each game or whether it was a replay beforehand. I'm not sure about the 1997 one. Whereas the opening game of Victoria Ground was Stoke City winning 1-0 against a team called Talc Rangers on the 28th of March 1878 in a friendly. Sunderland, we have the Stadium of Light compared to their old ground of Roker Park. The capacity of 48,339 of the Stadium of Light puts it as the biggest stadium currently in the Championship and ninth, I believe, overall in England's stadium sizes. Whereas Roker Park's wasn't as big, it was only 22,500. The record attendance of the Stadium of Light was 48,353, which saw Sunderland play against Liverpool on the 13th of August 2002, which would have been quite an interesting fixture, considering Liverpool were a big club, as was Sunderland, so it would have been a very exciting day, I imagine. Whereas the biggest one at Roker Park is 71,118, which saw Sunderland play Derby County on the 4th of March 1933 in an FA Cup 6th round tie. Actually, I might check what that score was because I wrote it down the other day. I can't. No, I did not write it down the other day. But yes, it was certainly a big occasion. 1930s on the 4th of March 1933. We would have seen in the FA Cup. We found two teams that were huge for the day. The best game at Stadium of Light was Sunderland's 3-0 win over Everton on the 11th of May 2016, which saw them survive at the end of the season. Whereas the best one at Roker Park would have been Sunderland's 5-4 win over Arsenal on the 28th of December 1935. Especially seeing Arsenal were a star-studded squad in the 1930s, as I've already mentioned. Sunderland were always a big club, but a 5-4 win, and that would have been a nice, exciting game as well. The opening game at Stadium of Light was Sunderland drawing 0-0 with Ajax on the 30th of July 1997. Whereas the opening game at Roker Park was Sunderland winning 1-0 on the 10th of September 1898 in a friendly over Liverpool. Swansea City currently play at the Liberty Stadium, but they did play at the Vetch Field. The capacity of the Liberty Stadium is 21,088. This was much bigger than the Vetch Field's meagre 11,475. The record attendance of the Liberty Stadium was 20,972, which saw Swansea City play Liverpool on the 1st of May 2016, which was certainly an occasion, I imagine, with Swansea doing well in the... they did quite well in 2016, didn't they? It was during that time when Swansea were doing unexpectedly well in the Premier League, and Liverpool were also doing relatively well. The Vetch Field fetched an attendance of a record that is of 32,796 when Swansea City played Arsenal on the 17th of February 1968. Which, Swansea I don't think would have been a great team, and I don't think Arsenal were either. Yeah. The best game at Liberty Stadium was Swansea City drawing 0-0 on the 23rd of January 2013 against Chelsea in what was the EFL Cup semi-final second leg, which took them, actually, I believe, to the final of the EFL Cup. And did they win it? I believe they won it. I think they're one of the two clubs to have won an English tournament from Wales, I believe. Swansea City's best game at Vetchfield was definitely the 2-0 win of Liverpool, on the 16th of February 1982. Considering Liverpool at the peak of their powers as well, this is proper era of Liverpool where we hear all the great names that they've got. Graham Souness, Kevin Keegan was it at that time as well. Was there some absolutely huge names at Ian Rush? Was he at Liverpool at that time? I'm not sure. I may have got that one wrong. But it was such a big Liverpool team. So for Swansea to win 2-0 was a big upset. The opening game at Liberty Stadium was a 1-1 draw between Swansea City and Fulham on the 23rd of July 2005 in a friendly. Whereas the opening game at Lichfield would have been much more aggro-filled, of Swansea City drawing 1-1 with Cardiff City on the 7th of September 1912. Swansea had only recently been formed, though, so maybe not as aggravated, but it was certainly a game which would retrospectively seem aggravated in the South Wales derby. Watford currently play at Vicarage Road, although they did play at a ground called Cassio Road, and no, not the company that makes calculators. Vicarage Road's capacity is 22,200, and we don't quite know the capacity of Cassio's roads, but we know the rest of the facts, which I think is enough. The record attendance at Vicarage Road was 34,099 of a game which saw Watford play Manchester United on the 3rd of February 1969. Whereas Cassio Road had a record attendance of 13,000, which saw the local derby of Watford versus Luton Town on the 25th of March 1921. I reckon that was just as tasty then as it is now. It's been a while since they played last season, didn't they? Yeah. The best game at Vicarage Road was Watford winning 3-1 over Leicester City on the 12th of May 2013, which was a Championship playoff semi-final and the second leg, which meant that they crowned themselves onto win. They went to the final, I believe, but they lost the playoff final. And it wasn't until a few seasons after did they get promoted. Whereas the best one at Cassio Road was Watford's 4-1 dominance of Luton Town, the 8th of April 1922. Only a year after the max attendance as well, but it would have been some game as well, seeing such a great... And I think Watford at the time won the Southern League or something like that. It was a few years before the Southern League's third division South was formed, wasn't it? The opening game at Vicarage Road saw Watford draw 0-0 with Millwall on the 30th of August 1922, whereas the opening game at Cassio Road saw Watford play against, we don't know the score, against a team called ATB Duns on the 27th of September 1890. The final one is West Bromwich Albion, who play at the Hawthorns at the moment, but they did play at a ground called Stony Lane. The capacity of the Hawthorns is 26,688. We don't know the capacity of Stony Lane, but we know the record attendance of both, and the Hawthorns was 64,815 in a game which saw the Baggies play Arsenal on the 6th of March 1937 in the FA Cup 6th round. Two teams definitely having an eye on that trophy. Whereas Stony Lane's max attendance record attendance was 20,977 of a local derby, which saw the Black Country Derby of West Brom versus Wolves on the 2nd of March 1895 in the FA Cup third round. The best game at the Hawthorns has got to be West Brom's 2-0 win over Valencia in the 6th of December 1978 in the UEFA Cup round of 16, which was purely just the fact for how dominant England was during the 1970s in Europe blows my mind. I mean, we say that we're under a dominant period right now, but we're really not. If you look at the European results of late, and I know there's some European fixtures tonight, most notably, of course, Newcastle versus AC Milan, but I believe Arsenal are also playing, but we're not really dominating as much as we did. At Stony Lane, West Brom won 3-1 against Wolverhampton Wanderers in what I would argue would be the best game on the 2nd of January 1886 in the FA Cup fourth round. The opening game at the Hawthorns was a 1-1 draw between West Brom and Derby on the 3rd of September 1900. Whereas the opening game at Stony Lane was West Brom winning 4-1 over Third Lanark, who were a Scottish team coming on tour of England at the time on the 5th of September 1885 in a friendly. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please do subscribe if you are new around here, and I hope you are doing well. Yeah, I apologise for the angle of the screen. But it's all right going football fandom. I hope you are also doing well on your channel. Thank you very much for supporting the channel. If you want to see more of this, please comment down below. And if you are interested in anything, any of your particular matches or any of the particular bits of trivia I said, please comment down below and I might make a video about that particular aspect as well. But goodbye for now.